Welcome everybody. I know people are coming into the webinar right now, and we are going to have more folks joining us over the next couple of minutes, but we wanted to say a few words of welcome. So glad that you've chosen to spend some time with us this afternoon if you're joining us on the West Coast, this evening if you're joining us on the East Coast or in the middle of the country. We welcome you to the Book of Life community. And to learn more about Book of Life, if you haven't had a chance to spend some time with us, maybe you're here because you heard great things about Pastor Kennard, which I know you have. But if you haven't learned much about Book of Life, you can go to our website, thebookoflifeproject.org. We'll put it in the chat. And you can learn more about the work that we're trying to do, helping each of us to partner with our future selves and to be more reflective about the way we are living our lives so that we can find more meaning and purpose and bring goodness and love into the world. You can go to thebookoflifeproject.org. You can also see some of our previous webinars. And I'm going to invite my dear friend and colleague, Rabbi Sydney Mintz, to introduce our extraordinary guest today, a person with whom she has spent a lot of time and gotten to know and has invited to join us. So Sydney, please tell us a little bit about what we're in for.
Thanks so much, Rabbi Yoshi and Matt. And it is a great honor to have Pastor Corey Kennard with us today. I became acquainted with Corey through our work on the Reimagine End of Life project. And he's on the board of directors, and I am on the 360 Advisory Council. And we actually never met in person. And when COVID began, we were given the great honor of helping to lead the monthly vigils with Reimagine End of Life. And no matter what came out of Corey's mouth, usually I was inspired. Most of the time I was in tears. And to have a colleague and a member of the clergy who is so well known and so well regarded as a leader in palliative care, who has been a leader in the business sector, in his own work as a pastor. He's the pastor of Amplify Christian Church. I hope I'm not embarrassing you, Corey, but you have such an incredible and deep spirit. And given what we've all gone through and what your community has gone through in Detroit, you have really been a beacon of hope for so many, I know, in your own community at Amplify, but you have been involved in the field of healthcare for over 25 years with really an experience in palliative care that most of us don't touch upon in hospice. In addition to Reimagine, I know that you are also on the board of the International End of Life Doula Association, which we want to hear a little bit more about, because I don't know if everybody's even familiar with what an end of life or a death doula is about. I also just want to lift up the fact that you are well regarded as a national leader, a national speaker. You are a great blogger. You are a New York Times contributing columnist, and you have two fabulous books, which I will recommend people getting. One is called Goliath Must Fall, which was in the early 2000s, and your most recent one, Hamburgers and a Holy Man, which I have not read yet, but I'm looking forward to getting to know you more through your writing. So first question I'm going to ask you, after I just express that deep gratitude to share with us your experience, is, people ask rabbis. You got three rabbis on the call. I don't know if this is your first time being, in a webinar with three rabbis, but we get asked as rabbis a question all the time, which is, why did you become a rabbi? Why did you become? And each of us answers it differently. It depends if you have, it's a 1-minute conversation or if it's an hour conversation. But what I find is that people actually want to know, what do you do as a rabbi? So my first question is really, tell us who you are, what you're about. How did you start in terms of your own faith work and develop the need in your own soul to be a religious leader, a pastor? And what do you do as a pastor?
Well, first of all, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this great forum this evening. I appreciate this, Yoshi and Matthew and Sydney. I appreciate you, and I say we from my community. We appreciate you allowing us to just be a part of this. I firmly believe that anybody who becomes a religious leader, if they felt like they were born to do that, then that's fine. But I'm not one of those individuals. I was one of those individuals who ran from it, much like Jonah. Who ran from the call of God, and what he was supposed to do was carry a message to a people and to warn them, and he didn't initially want to do it, and there were a number of reasons, as you already know why. But I just want to say that I ran from my call, and I felt like my life turned to a point where I was getting swallowed by a great fish, and couldn't make any progress until I really yielded to what I call this call in life. And what does that look like for me? That call looks very much like one where you feel something in your innermost being that says you are called and you are supposed to carry the message of God to people. What is that message? The message of peace, love, grace, mercy, and to teach others to live in a way that is honorable and just. And so that was that innermost call that was pulling me and compelling me to take this walk. And I couldn't run from it any further. And so I just spent one night in prayer, and it became really clear to me that this is what I should be doing, and that is to become a faith leader, initially a person who just really helped other faith leaders, but then ultimately becoming a faith leader myself and leading my own congregation. So it's a journey. That's the what we call the Cliff Notes version, the short, sweet version. And I'd be more than happy to share with anybody who wants to personally talk to me about all the specifics of that. But because of the time constraints tonight, I just want to say that that call was something that I could not run from anymore. And really, for me, being a pastor means to do those things that I just stated, to help people to understand what I believe Almighty God wants them to understand and to do, to live a life that brings about justice and peace and adheres to the mercy of God, and understand that I am called to teach and to study and to be in a position to lead where leadership is necessary. To me, pastoring is not glamorous. It's not something where we just hope to receive accolades. If much like you, if you feel that way, then we're in the wrong business, so to speak, if I could say that. This is the job of a servant, and I'm here to serve people. And if I can just say, what does a pastor do? He serves, and he or she uplifts. He or she helps others to live their best life and to follow the guidelines of God in the best way possible.
It's a beautiful answer. And I know embedded in each one of our rabbinates is that sense of, we say eved, the word in Hebrew, which is being not just a servant to the divine, but a servant to our people. So I think we have that in common. And you said it best. It's not a glamorous job. You don't go in it for the glamour. And I would say, especially if you did, this year really challenged that more than ever before for anybody who was, in the world of faith as a religious leader. And I would say, we're going to talk a little bit more later about just how challenging this year has been for your community, for you, for the church, what it was like being in Michigan. But we can't ignore what it felt like this week as our country was on another precipice, waiting and watching for the verdict for the murder trial for George Floyd. And so I just wanted to surface that and acknowledge it, and how painful and how challenging not that moment was, but it just another moment that has come to our attention that is so necessary. And I just wanted to feel you out, and from your vantage point, as an African-American pastor, somebody who's living in the Midwest, we all were acutely aware of what was going on with the white supremacy movement and continues to in Michigan. What do you feel was the impact of this guilty verdict? And I was wondering about the difference when people are talking about accountability with racism and racial justice in this country, and justice.
To give you an idea of the impact of the verdict and just this past year, since last May, of seeing the murder of George Floyd happen right before our eyes. And last night was a night in which we have what we call Bible study. And last night, I usually have it for about an hour. And we spent probably 40 minutes, the first 40 minutes, talking about the feelings that people had as it relates to what has gone on since not only the George Floyd murder, but the many other deaths that have occurred throughout history that keep coming up and that we're recalling, and even to the most recent ones. These are things that, our congregation needs to talk about, and I'll lead them to talk about them. I believe that we would not be the people of God if we did not deal with the affairs of this world. There are things that are going on in this world, and if we want to be relevant in the world, we must deal with the reality of what's going on. And I would be I wouldn't be who I say that I am if I did not lead my congregation in conversations such as that, because once they get off of their knees and praying, and once they close their Bibles and go back out into the world, they have to deal with these things. And what are we as people of God and as faith leaders doing to equip our people to live in a better way? And so I took the time to talk about it. It had a great impact. And I'm going to tell you, I was not all in with a guilty verdict that was going to happen. I didn't feel like that was an assured thing. I was nervous about not only having a not guilty verdict to rain down, but I was concerned about the country. I was concerned about the world. I was concerned about what a not guilty verdict would render us. It would put us in a position where I believe that more bloodshed could have happened and more destruction could have happened to this country. And I do believe that we would not be probably talking tonight if that were the case. So I felt a great impact on just the whole process and the stress of waiting once we knew the verdict was in. And I did not have jubilation in my spirit with the guilty verdict. It was more or less a spirit of finally, something that signifies justice. And so it was not a jumping up and down and a yelling and yay and cheering. For me, it was, I just dropped my head and I just thank God for, allowing me to see that, the right thing was done. And to me, that was the right thing.
It's interesting because to pray for, speaking from my own standpoint, to pray for a verdict, given what we want to pray for in the world, seems to almost be, I'm not sure of how prayer, let me say this, we know our prayers don't manifest in realities a lot of the time. And to pray for anyone to be guilty or not guilty seems almost out of the ordinary for how it is that we act. And yet, I got to say, I said to my wife that morning, I wasn't surprised that they didn't come to a conclusion in the evening. It was, it takes so long to get things going. But I thought to myself, if we get through this day and there's not a verdict, I didn't even know if the streets would be able to hold back violence, given that, should it even take that long. So there was a sigh of relief. Do you think that this, everyone last summer kept on saying, this is now the inflection point, but you hear that so many times, and all that was done by way of the legal system was finally something was just. Do you think it's actually an inflection point? Do you think we could depend on things getting better as we go along, or is this just one because it was so clear on videotape that you couldn't run away from it? I wonder what you think about that.
Matthew, that's my fear. My fear is that it's the latter, is what you just said, that this was just a moment where you could not escape the fact that this was an evil and unjust act. And so my greatest fear is that Derek Chauvin is just a scapegoat for the time being. He's just the fall person for a time being, because you could not really get around him getting out of this. But does the fight continue? Yes. Will we have unjust situations occur in the court systems? Yes, because it's going to take some time for us to get out of this. Now, is this a demarcation? Is this an indication of things that could come? And I believe that is yes. You, in the Jewish tradition, you always have markers. You always have places where you can remember the things that you believe God has done, and you celebrate those times and those moments. I believe that this is a time and a moment that we can mark in history. How much is going to change, what happens in the future, that's yet to be seen. But I think that we need to take it for what it is. It is a moment where we believe justice has prevailed, and we should take it as such, and look at it as the potential of what can happen in the future. How much impact it happens or has on the future cases, I'm just not sure yet.
How much do you think, we always push everything onto the country and the failure of leadership in the government. I want us to look at with a mirror on our own selves in terms of, do you think our respective religions, or how much do you think our respective religions have perpetuated systemic racism? Because, here we are fighting for justice, but I have a very dear friend who I work with in the state, and he said he got to his church about 7 years ago to become the pastor, and took a walk around the pews, and it's an African-American church, and yet every single fan that was on every single pew seat was a picture of a white Jesus. Yeah. And the first thing his first act was to throw away all these fans, because here people were fanning themselves with something that didn't look anything like them. And then it occurred to all of us, wait a minute, what's our part in this? Systemically, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. It's a big subject. And I know we're not going to spend the whole hour on this, because like you spend 40 minutes, we could easily do the same. But what would you say is our responsibility by way of our histories, respective histories? And I mean religion itself, not color.
And I thank you for that question. I think it's a very relevant one, and I'm so glad you asked it. I was going to bring it up if you didn't, but I think that religion in and of itself, or our communities of faith, play a huge role in what has been known as systemic racism in society. If we look at the educational system, and if we look at the religious system, there are many aspects of faith that are never talked about. Some traditions are rooted in Africa, in the continent of Africa, that we never discuss or really talk about. There are many African Americans or Black people or people of color in the world who have done great things from a religious standpoint, and we don't talk much about them. And then even you hit the greatest point that I have as it relates to what we need to deal with, and that is this whole color thing as it relates to Jesus. I think that the church, the Christian church in and of itself, has been the place where I believe systemic racism has found its ground and roots in perpetuating the fact that there is a supreme race, so to speak, and this race happens to reflect God, and which, if you look back in history, those things are not factual. The paintings and the pictures that we see are not actual renderings. It's not like there was a Polaroid when Jesus was walking the earth and he took pictures of them, but we see the images that are perpetuated, and we look back historically, and those images are much different, but they changed over time. And so many times one of the slave ships that we came to America on was named Jesus. And so now you think about the perpetuation of that and what that feels like. Those things are very real and very rooted in our nature and really in our DNA. And those are things that the religious community has to address. And to me, I think that we need strong voices addressing those issues and saying, we're going to fight as people of faith against systemic racism. And so our voices are so important, because I believe that we are the voice of God in the earth. And so what better voice to be used than the voice of God?
That's so beautiful. One of the texts that rabbis often go to when we're starting to have a conversation around these issues, whether it's racism or other forms of xenophobia, is a text that asks the question, why is it that God chose, according to tradition, to create humanity through this common ancestry? Adam and Eve are mythic parents for all of us. And the rabbi's answer is so that no one could claim, my blood is redder, my dad is better, my mom is better, but instead we'd understand that we're part of this human family. And, that's a 2,000-year-old rabbinic midrash. But one of the things that always that I always remember when I read that is there was a reason that someone had to invent that story. That story had to be invented because people were hating all over each other and claiming that their lineage was better, and their what we say in Yiddish, yichus, their connections were better. So I wanted to stay on that a little bit longer because the conversation about racism and anti-Semitism and the ways that when we talk about intersectionality, the idea that all of our common struggles and common moments of oppression bring us together. It's become a controversial issue when it comes to Israel engagement. But I think as we zoom out, the broader idea that there is an intersecting of narratives, an intersecting of experiences, and certainly when we think about the power of the master narrative of the Jewish people that really begins with us in slavery, we think about the way these narratives and these life experiences intersect. I wanted to ask you in terms of the work that you do. Your church is in Detroit, but obviously you have a much broader lens because of the travel that you do and speaking engagements and those kinds of things. How in your life have you seen that intersecting of our struggles against racism and our struggles against anti-Semitism, and the ways you've seen Jewish communities and Christian communities coming together around these conversations?
Yoshi, I believe that we have not done enough coming together on those common ground principles of anti-Semitism and racism as it relates to Black people in this country. When we understand Christianity, and I'm a lover of Judaism. Why am I a lover of Judaism? Because it is the faith by which my faith was birthed out of. And so I recognize that. And that's important. What I also recognize is that when God chose Israel, it was God's choice to choose Israel at that particular time. And but it did not make Israel better than anybody else. And that's where I think we get off on having these issues and concerns, because not only do you have, in order to have a group that feels better than any group in the earth, not the Israelites, but any group on the earth who feels better than somebody else, you must have another group that feels less than. That's what that whole premise is based upon. Racism in and of itself is based upon a subgroup or subculture. And so I believe that we have more in common than we have been speaking about when it comes to the service and how people have been treated who not only look like us, but feel or worship like us. So you have communities who have been targeted, Jews who have been targeted, you have had Blacks who have been targeted, and yet we do not get together and talk enough about how both groups have a common bond and how we can come together to really help to stand against these evils that are coming against us. And so one deals with faith and culture, and the other deals with faith and culture. We've seen synagogues attacked, we've seen churches attacked. And so we have to understand how important it is for us to come together. But there is an intersection when you deal with you said the Israelites in slavery. And then, you deal with the 400 years, and then you deal with, in America here, Blacks and the 400 years from 1619 to 2019, 400 years of what we call systematic racism, slavery, so to speak, in this country. So the parallels are there. And they're showing us that there is a very kindred spirit that we have. And if we just stand together, we can stand against those things, that the evils that are coming against us based upon our faith or our cultural beliefs.
I really appreciate that concept, and that image of what it means to stand together. And the other thing that we all have to remind ourselves, even within the Jewish community, is that too often we talk about Blacks and Jews, forgetting that there are many Jews who are Black, and people of color with different ethnic backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, and these things are not at all mutually exclusive, no more than it would be in Christianity, to talk about
That's right.
it that way, so that there are all sorts of ways that we can work together and really celebrate all the things that we have done together and can do together, and also commemorate and mourn some of the things that we have suffered together. I wanted to pivot a little bit to the election, the 2020 election. And, it's a conversation that I've had with a lot of my colleagues, both Jewish, rabbinic colleagues, and also pastors and ministers and others, how you navigated some of the challenging moments of the last 4 years where, as I look back on my life, and I think about moments where I felt polarization and division in this country, I've never felt anything like I felt, in the last few years. And I was just wondering how you navigated that, how your church community navigated that. I mean, I won't make any assumptions about how people vote, because people don't vote as a block, even if, within the Jewish community, something like 80% of American Jews voted for President Biden in the last election. Well, that means 20% didn't. And however it is in the church community, it's probably not 100%. So how did you navigate all of that tension, all of the challenges, and particularly, some of the things that you were dealing with in Michigan around some of the tensions leading up to the election?
I saw what I saw was a rebellious nature that rose up against the preceding 8 years of the Obama-Biden administration. I saw the rising of individuals who felt like they were losing a grip on power, and the realization that the reign of the white supremacists would look like it is coming to an end. And so, with all due respect, President Trump gave a voice to those who were fearful of the fact that they would no longer have a voice. And we're talking about white men in the country who were in control and in power. And so to have women to be in positions of power, to have people of color in positions of power was threatening. And so I saw that there was a stance against that. And we saw that as the administration of the past 4 years were carrying out their goals and their duties. And we saw very little being done from a political standpoint to help the people of this country to get back on their feet and to fight against the coronavirus and all those things. It was really issues of power. And so with my church or congregation, it was very difficult for us to just worship and not be worried at the same time about what was going on in the world. Yes, there was a great concern. And each week we were concerned about how the coronavirus was being handled by the administration. As you know, African Americans, and I know we may talk about that in a few moments, African Americans were in a position of vulnerability as it relates to the coronavirus and dying from it more so than any other group, especially in this area. And then you had the white supremacists to come out against Governor Whitmer in this state and to threaten her life, to threaten the Capitol here in Michigan. And then we ultimately saw on January the 6th, the storming of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. So all those events were showing me, and I talked to our congregation about this, it was really showing us that these were the acts of people who were fearful of losing a grip on power. And that's how I looked at it. and I tried to help others to see it that way. They were getting backed into a corner and they came out fighting. But I believe that people with, and once again, and I'm not trying to paint a broad brush. As you said earlier, Yoshi, everybody is not evil. There are people in every particular race and culture who have some serious issues that I'm concerned about. But when we look at things in general, yes, 80% of the Jews who stated that they voted may have voted for President Biden, but once again, 20% didn't. All Blacks did not vote for Biden. There were percentages of Blacks who voted for President Trump. And so we have to come to the reality that commonality is not always rooted in what we believe as it relates to what another person believes or how we look. But commonality to me is a cultural thing, and culture to me is how people think and how people act and what they believe on a common ground level and how they can work together to make things right for a majority of the people here in the United States and even in the world. And I'm not, because God is not American. So we need to think more globally when we deal with these issues as well, because when we look at the George Floyd incidents, when we look at the last 4 years of the White House administration, these things impacted the world. They did not just impact Americans. There were people all over the world who were negatively impacted by these events and other events. And so when we gain a greater world scope, we will understand that humanity is crying out for righteousness and peace and love that can only come from God. And so I do believe that we have a lot of work to do in this area, but it was a struggle. In short, Yoshi, it was a struggle for us the last 4 years to deal with what was going on in this country under the last administration. And I felt threatened as a Black man in society. And I felt like, somebody could say something and lo and behold, they could accuse me falsely and, I could be railroaded by the system and be just like everybody else that preceded me. So those are concerns that I genuinely had.
Well, there was also just the rhetoric when we heard things like blood and soil and America first. We know that some of those phrases are rooted in Nazi ideology, in fascist ideology, and to hear those kinds of things being chanted, it's chilling, scary.
Yes, it really is. When you think about, going back to the phrase that was used most often and printed on hats and T-shirts, "Make America Great Again." I was just wondering when that day was for people of color in this country. I was wondering when was that? When was it great for us? And so that right there said that you were not including everybody in that statement, that there was only a certain group of people that you were including. And to me, that greatness went back to when whites were in power and everybody else was under the foot or the heel of those who were in power.
So we are finding ourselves, I think you said it, Yoshi or Matt, about the inflection point, and that, we thought about, the first, for so many of us, horrific 3 years of the Trump administration, and then coming into this literally unbelievably painful pandemic in the midst of it, and feeling the impact of it. And as you and I spoke a couple of days ago, Corey, that the impact on people of color in this country is something that is horrific and something that we will be contending with, I hope, in terms of the awareness and facing it as a result of racial injustice and racial medical injustice for years to come. And may it be God's will that these moments shine a bright light on what's so wrong, and that more and more people look at it and say, it's not just wrong, but this is the time to move forward in a different way. And I'm wondering, specifically, what this year really was like for your church and for the community, the African-American community in the Midwest. What was it like to be a pastor during COVID for a community that was disproportionately impacted. And there were a lot of people in your own state, your own city, who had the privilege of not being impacted because of their whiteness, because of their economic privilege. And how were you sustained through it?
Well, on a personal level, I did not see my parents in person for a year. Just to let you, and they live in the city with me. And because I'm in hospital administration as well, there was a fear of me even being around, and I wanted to keep them safe and wanted them to feel safe. But COVID-19 caused great fear in many of us, and for that reason, since March 8th of 2020, we have not met in person. We have been strictly an online ministry, and that was largely because even at times when we could have gotten together, doing a poll of our ministry, there were many elderly African Americans in our congregation who felt very fearful about getting together. And we heard about the impact of people who did come together. As a matter of fact, I know a couple in the hospital who went to their church at a time when it was still shaky about people getting together. But yet they went, and at their coffee hour was when they believed they both contracted COVID-19. And unfortunately, both of them died in the hospital in the same room together because of that disease. And all, just by going back to church. And so these are the stories that people were hearing, and people were very fearful. And so we have really reconstructed the way that we worship and how we think about worship. And we're still in a position to help people. It has caused us to grow that dimension of our ministry, to have more of an outreach to people, to do grocery shopping for those who may be fearful of going grocery shopping. So we have people in our ministry who will help others by going to the grocery store for them, where, free of charge. They don't have to pay anybody in our ministry to go shopping for them. And then we even buy and purchase items and groceries for individuals. We stay connected with one another through fasting and prayer via online, and in getting together, twice a week online, and making sure that we're staying connected by phone and talking with one another. But it has added, a new dimension. I believe that all of this has not been bad. As you know, as people of faith and as faith leaders, God has always allowed for persecution to happen, to move people in a direction that he desires for them to go. And so I believe that this right now, this pandemic has opened the eyes of the people of God. It's opened the eyes of the church. It's opened the eyes of Jews and Muslims and people of faith, likewise, all over the world, to say, what is God saying to us right now because of this pandemic? What does he want us to do differently during this time period that we haven't been doing? And many people in the Christian faith were focused on buildings and building greater structures. And now those structures are empty. And so it's all about the people. And I believe that that's what God has been speaking to us. Can we get back to the basics of loving one another? Can we get back to the basics of understanding the importance of connecting with one another when we can? And I think that we took those things for granted when we could do those things. And now we long for that human connection and that touch. And I think that God has restored that in us, that desire to connect with one another and to appreciate each other even more now than ever before.
Thank you for that. It is indeed hopeful when you put it that way. And I think for the four of us here who are leaders of congregations, it doesn't matter what religion you are, we're also being really tried in ways that we haven't before about, well, then now what? Now that things are very slowly opening up, are people going to come back? People have been knocking at the door. We want to come in. We want to come back. We want to be in person. And it sounds like you are hopeful that the changes that COVID has brought about, not just the terror, the fear, the death, but the shifting of priorities, could be a good thing for people who already are members of our churches and synagogues and mosques, but could be hopeful in terms of more people.
True, and we have reached people that we were not reaching before. There are people on the West Coast that we and the South and in the North and even on the East Coast that our ministry is able to reach now that we could not reach before, because we were just focused on, the congregation where we were, and God has added a new dimension to how we reach out to people and how we can help people across this country. And so it's given us more of a global view of ministry as opposed to a city of Detroit and Detroit's metropolitan area view of ministry. And so I think that I was short-sighted as a leader until the pandemic really opened my eyes up to more of a global aspect of what God wants us to do.
I look at the time, and this conversation in itself could go on for a while, but there are unique qualities you bring besides unbelievable teaching you've done so far that I want to make sure we touch on. And I'll preface this by saying that when I give sermons about death and dying, I will often be apologetic and say, when you leave here, I don't want to hear you walking through the parking lot saying, I can't believe the rabbi talked about death. I said, I want you to say that he talked to us about living and about life, and that the reason we focus at all on death is because it should induce us to have a life well lived by the time it's all over. So if quickly you can tell us, because I don't really want to get into the meat of it, I'm guessing, given that, 20 years ago, I didn't know what a birth doula was, before I had my first child, and my wife said, we're going to have a birth doula. And I said, excuse me. And so I'm guessing that if that's true, a lot of people certainly don't know what a death doula is. Can you just give us a word about that? And we'll talk about that a little bit.
Yes, so I'm proud to be on the board of ANELDA and to have the opportunity to focus on helping individuals to understand what end of life or death doulas are. And to me, Matthew, it's no different than a birth doula. Death is just another birth. And so when we look at death as another birth experience, it is one that is necessary when you think about a birth doula, of bringing someone into this world and bringing them into or helping to usher another life into this world through that mother by way of Almighty God. We understand that to have a person who can be there, to be empathetic, to walk with that mom through that process of giving birth, is exactly what an end of life doula does, only they are dealing with a person who is passing, and those family members who are there to help them to celebrate the life of that person who may be passing, to have those key mementos present during the time, those things that that person may want to hear, or that they love, the favorite songs or music genres, pictures and things of that nature, to have those things present and to talk with that family about what the death experience will mean for them in moving forward. And so that person who is dying, yes, you want to give them the comfort that they need as they make their transition into their next experience. But also we believe that end of life doulas are there just as much for the family as they are there for the person who is dying, just like that birth doula is there just as much for that mom as they are there for the child who is being birthed into this world. And so it's really to provide those same things: comfort, direction, to give that coaching, to help them to understand that they're going through something very natural, and how can they experience that in the best way possible. And so we say in the doula world, we want to give people the best death possible. And so to have a good death means that also we need to reflect on living a good life. And so that's important.
So beautifully said. I have found when I'm in those moments, I would say, except for one case I can remember in 24 years, that the person dying is the least afraid person in the room. And there's this great parable that when Moses has to let Aaron know that he's going to go, Aaron is completely ready to surrender. And then Moses says, wait a minute, what about me? You know, what am I going to do when I don't have my brother at holiday dinners? And who am I going to sit next to, you know, at the pew? And, you know, it goes on and sort of embellishes what life they had. Why do you think that is the case? Well, why is the person who's actually going to be the one who's going so much less afraid than the people who are surrounding that person?
I think that they're experiencing something that none of us will experience until we get to that point. And so I think that there is a supernatural thing that God allows us to experience when we get to that point of knowing that our transition is getting ready to take place. And so when we think about that, no one else in that room can understand that. I had a person, and just to give you a quick story, there was a person who was a friend of mine who was dying in the hospital. And she indicated to me that the toughest moments that she had was trying to convince her daughters that she was ready to go, and that she was fine with it, but she was concerned about them. And she felt like she had to struggle and continue to fight to try to live until she felt like they were okay with the process. And so she asked me to bring them into the room, and we had a conversation about death. We had a conversation about how she felt about death and how she said, it's okay, I'm fine. We believe what we believe. Now it's time for me to experience what we believe. And so with that being said, there were tears that were shed, but those daughters, when they came to the reality of that, she passed that next day. And they were at peace. But it was not until the conversation was had that it allowed that person who was dying to feel the comfort and the peace of making that transition. So she was more concerned about them than she was about her dying herself. So I think that it's a very relevant parable that you brought up, and it's one that we must have. We must have these conversations in order for individuals to know that it is a supernatural experience. I believe God gives us the grace to die, and to die in a way that is meaningful. And it can only be meaningful when those surrounding that individual can share in and celebrate the life of that person who is making their transition.
Yeah, and people get out of the way of themselves enough. Oftentimes you'll hear people say, it was so painful, and yet one of the most beautiful moments of my life, being able to escort my mother, my father, whomever it is. And it's so counterintuitive because it is so scary and so sad, and yet it is one of the most precious moments we could share.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Well, I want to be also cognizant of the fact that we could talk for the next 3 hours together, but I know for, as we said, Rabbi Gewirtz and his cohort, it's getting on, what is it, almost 8 o'clock there, 7 o'clock for you, Corey. And it is probably unusual that we're in a room together. I'd rather actually be in a room together, but I'd like you to have the last word. And if you have any questions for us, lay it on us. Let us know what you want to know. And then, of course, as Rabbi Yoshi said, come on down, come to San Francisco, come to New Jersey, and come to LA and be a part of our community.
Well, I've been, in all of those places. I just have not been there with you. So I would love to come and visit all of you, definitely. And I just want to say to you, with the things that are going on, or I ask you this question, with the things that are going on, how have you talked about the George Floyd case, or how have you talked about systemic racism, or have you? Or is it something that you're looking forward to doing, but just haven't been able to really dive into it yet with your congregations?
Well, I'll start, and then we'll go towards the east, which is and I do want to bring up that some of this that has been really lifted up and been a painful part of the conversation has been what Yoshi said, which is that there are plenty of people in our community that are Jews of color, and the people in our community who have suffered both racism and anti-Semitism have been burdened sometimes by having to be the ones who come forward and say, we need to talk about this. And so I think one of the most challenging things is to allow people of color to be the leaders and center them in terms of telling us what we need to do and listening better. And so we have had historically a group called the Black Jewish Unity Group at our synagogue. And it is kind of, we've been tussling, especially this year, with what does it mean to have a Black and Jewish? What about the Black Jews? So we're talking about it. It's ongoing, and we definitely give sermons. I was on the national board of Bend the Arc, a Jewish Justice Partnership, and it has become predominantly a racial justice organization. And so it's conversations that are necessary and that none of the three of us shy away from, but we know that are not just necessary, but something that we have to include more and more in what we say and how we act.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of what Sydney just shared. And we've been having these conversations, well before the George Floyd murder and some of the racial justice protests. And as Sid said, similarly in our congregation, there are, people of color who identify as Jews, who are Jewish. And so, trying to help each other be more open and sensitive to what that means. I was at a really wonderful program here in LA that was hosted by Bishop Kenneth Ulmer. I don't know if you know Bishop Ulmer at
Bishop Ulmer. Yes, I do. I'm aware. I don't know him personally, but I followed his work for years. Yes.
So our congregations have done a lot of programming together over the years, and pulpit exchanges and singing and all sorts of wonderful opportunities to be together. And he hosted.
Is he still at the forum? Is he still at the forum?
He's not at the forum anymore. Sorry, something's happening on my phone here. He's not at the forum anymore.
Okay.
They sold the forum, but that's where he was. But anyway, his church is in Inglewood, and they had a program last January, right before the pandemic, January of 2019. Of 2020, right before the pandemic, where he brought together rabbis and pastors to speak out about some violence that was happening in New York at that time. And some of the violence was, as he put it was Black on Jewish violence. And so he really wanted our communities to be there together. And one of the things that one of the speakers said that day that I thought was really important is, it was a rabbi who said, we need to acknowledge that there is racism in the Jewish community that must be confronted, and we can't pretend it doesn't exist. And we also need to acknowledge that there's anti-Semitism in the Black community that needs to be confronted and surface so that we can try to address it. And I thought that was really helpful. And then, of course, that conversation about, the way the communities come together in individuals who are Black and Jewish. So I think we're all learning so much, and we're all we're growing in this moment. I'm hopeful. I sent something out to the congregation yesterday, quoting John Lewis, blessed memory, who just, a month before he died, he spoke about the protests that were all over the world, and he said that gave him hope, and that we're going to get there someday. And I do believe that. I mean, it might not be in our lifetimes, but that's okay. We'll get there someday.
So I certainly speak about it, but I want to say a couple of things. That this year I started by acknowledging the bias that I have in my own spirit, and that I've always felt like I've been on the right side of things. And while feeling like I was on the right side of history, I was blinded to the fact that I myself, that all of us, that there's no human being I know without bias. And I did that and acknowledged that because I was hoping to enable people to be able to acknowledge their own, and that there's a difference between racism and racial bias. But if we don't acknowledge racial bias, it will very quickly turn into racism. And that meant for me acknowledging white privilege, which is still in this moment very painful to say, because there's a part of me, honestly, that wants to fight back and say, that's not true. I didn't get this and I didn't get that. And you start to have that inner fight. And I had that inner fight in front of the congregation. And some people it enabled to acknowledge their own, and some people just made angry because either, and I don't know, they don't mind the fact that they have racist feelings, or it's just too hard to acknowledge out loud racial bias because they think right away that there's something wrong with them, as opposed to acknowledging that we are imperfect human beings. And what I'm still trying to do, and I haven't figured out how to do this, I don't, for sure the country is not, is what it means to really have these conversations. Everyone was saying, we have to have the conversation. So I said, let's stop saying we have to have the conversation. Let's have it. Like right now, let's have the conversation. And by the way, the Black church does a much better job than the Jewish synagogue does, because there's dialogue between preacher and congregant. We just have people keep their hands folded and listen and smile. And so I want to have the conversation, but I don't think the country still is at the place where we can all say the things we have to say, because not only will it be painful, but we've also entered a day and age where as soon as you say something, you're put into a corner and labeled for saying that thing. And what's paradoxical about that is that unless you say that thing, you can't make progress.
That's right.
And so that is what I'm struggling with. So yeah, we're talking about it. All three of us are. And I still haven't figured out how to set a tone by which we can have a conversation that's actually going to help us progress forward. By the way, we're having better conversations between Blacks and Jews in town, between African Americans and Jews in town, than Jews and Jews are doing with each other because of what I just said. So there's a long way to go. And this conversation feels hopeful because here we are talking about hard things without at all raising any of our voices. And,
so I'm willing to, and I know that our time is up, but I'm willing to go on any national platform with you and all three of you, and let's push the envelope. To me, I invite you to our congregation. If you invite me to yours, or gatherings of people that we can talk with, who we believe can have a great conversation about how we can move forward. And I would say, I'm here, I'm your brother, and I'm here to do that. And so I am open to that. So I'd say, let's do it.
I feel that, and I absolutely agree. And I think the three of us, it sounds like a book of life trip to Detroit.
Yeah. Hey, I'm an open book.
I love it. Thank you so much to Pastor Corey Kennard for your time, for your wisdom, for your heart. It means the world to us. And I'm grateful to Sydney for connecting us to you. One of the things that has been so wonderful about this experience of working with Matthew and Sydney is getting to meet their friends, their rabbis, and you're one of them. So I want to thank you for that. I want to remind everybody, May 27th will be our next webinar, and we'll be interviewing Noah Tishby, who's a producer and an actress and now an author of a book about Israel, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth. And I just want to echo some of the words and leave everybody with the words that Matthew said and that Corey and Sydney said at the end here, is that, sometimes we just have to have the courage to speak out and to ask questions. Our tradition, one of the names for God in our tradition is Ha'omer v'haya ha'olam. God is the one who speaks and makes worlds. And through speech, we can shape our world and the way we think about it and the way we see each other. So thank you for your words, Corey. Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Matthew. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We hope to see you May 27th.
God bless you. Thank you.
God bless you, Corey.
God bless you. All right.